The hospital called while I was comparing grocery prices on my phone. My mother had been living with increasing pain for months, always insisting she could wait a little longer. This time, the surgeon didn't leave room for delay. The procedure she needed would cost $6,200 after insurance. If it was postponed much longer, her recovery would become harder and the risks would grow. I stepped into the hallway and called my husband. I expected concern, maybe a question about how my mother was feeling. Instead, he sighed. "We just bought the lake house," he said. "Figure it out yourself." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "My mom needs surgery." "I heard you." Then another voice entered the call, his mother. "Stop calling my son," she said sharply. "Go ask your own family." The line went dead. I stood in that hallway staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. The conversation hadn't even lasted 2 minutes, but somehow 15 years of marriage suddenly looked different. I didn't call back. There wasn't enough energy for anger. My mother needed me more than I needed an argument. The next 48 hours became paperwork, insurance appeals, hospital billing offices, and uncomfortable conversations with people I'd never imagined asking for guidance. A patient advocate helped me review payment options. My mother's church quietly organized his meals without making a spectacle of it. My manager approved emergency leave before I finished explaining why. Piece by piece, what had looked impossible became manageable. Not easy, just possible. The surgery was scheduled. While my mother was in the operating room, I sat alone with terrible coffee and a notebook full of expenses. I realized my husband had never called once to ask whether the surgery happened. Not once. The operation went well. When the surgeon finally smiled and said she would recover, I cried harder than I had in years. They weren't tears of relief alone. Something inside me had finally stopped defending what couldn't be defended. During my mother's recovery, I met with an attorney, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted clarity. We reviewed our finances, property records, and obligations. I learned things I should have understood years earlier. I opened an account in my own name. I changed emergency contacts. I updated legal documents so my medical decisions would no longer depend on someone who had already shown me exactly where I ranked. Those were quiet decisions, no speeches, no dramatic confrontations, just signatures. 3 days after the surgery, someone pounded on my front door, hard enough to shake the windows. It was my husband. His face looked nothing like it had during our last conversation. "I've been trying to reach you," he said through the door. I didn't unlock it. "You need to open this." I asked why. His answer came quickly. Apparently, the attorney's office had contacted him regarding the financial separation process and requested documentation for shared assets. He hadn't expected official letters. He thought the phone call at the hospital had been another marital argument that would disappear after a few days. Instead, reality had arrived in an envelope. "We can work this out," he insisted. I stayed behind the closed door. "You told me to figure it out." Silence. "You did," I continued. "So I did." For the first time since I'd known him, he had nothing ready to say. The authority of signed legal paperwork had replaced every conversation he thought he could postpone. There was no yelling, no insults. Only the uncomfortable sound of someone realizing consequences don't always announce themselves loudly. Eventually, I heard his footsteps fade. Months later, my mother walked without the pain that had haunted her for so long. She apologized more than once for causing trouble. I always corrected her. She hadn't caused anything. A medical emergency had simply revealed what already existed. People sometimes ask when I knew my marriage was over. They expect me to mention the legal meetings or the day he came pounding on my front door. But it wasn't either of those. It was the moment his mother said, "Go ask your own family." She thought she was pushing me away. She was. She just didn't realize she was pushing me toward a life where I no longer begged to be treated like family.